9mm versus 45 ACP and subcompact pistols. And what we have today is our Speer Gold Dot G2 carry gun. It's kind of a mouthful. So this is basically the short barrel version of our Gold Dot G2. So Gold Dot comes in the original Gold Dot. It comes in a Gold Dot short barrel. Then we have a G2. And then within the G2, there's a carry gun variant, and that's what this is, meant for short barrels. So basically it's a Gold Dot. You got your bonded bullet, but the tips there are filled with like an elastomer type material. It's kind of like a critical defense, but a little bit more stretchy. So our 9mm is a 135 grain rated at 1120 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel. Our 45 ACP is actually a plus P, and that is rated at 1080 feet per second through a 5-inch barrel. That's just the ratings they give. And there's only 3 variants of this particular ammo. It's the 9mm, the 40, and the 45 ACP plus P. So there is no plus P 9mm version of it, and there is no standard pressure 45 version of it. So these are just the only two that come in a 9mm and a 45 ACP. So I'm going to use my Taurus G2C with a 3.2-inch barrel to test the 9mm, and my M&P 45 to test the 45. That's a 3.3-inch barrel. So we'll see what we get with these. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point, no rib simulation that can slow down its penetration, and that'll give us our best potential shot to see how well those will perform. Then after doing a plain clear ballistic shot, I'm going to do more of a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So when you're talking 3 inches here, it's more like 1.5 inch pectoral muscle, and this 16-inch block is more like 8 inches here. So really what this simulates is a 9.5-inch thick individual with ribs on the front and back. I'm going to try to keep these bullets within the first or the back rib simulation. If they stay in there, that's a success. If they go through it, there's a potential that they could pass through an average size individual. So we'll see how these do on our plain clear ballistic shot and our real world simulation shot, and then we'll shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm. This is rated at 1120 feet per second from a 4-inch barrel. Let's see how close I get to 1120 feet per second from my 3.2-inch Taurus G2C. So 9mm here, 135 grain. $1,063, $1,060, $1,073, $1,053, $1,069. So pretty consistent overall, not bad velocity there. For the barrel length, it's not bad. So our 45 ACP, this is rated at 1080 feet per second. That's the exact same rating and bullet weight as the original 200 grain plus P. So for reference from my from this pistol here, the original plus P 200 grain gave me 956 feet per second. So let's see how close I get to 956 compared to that original 200 grain plus P. 950, 953, 932, 925, 931. So yeah, a little bit less than that original, but I'm not complaining about that because that one had a lot more recoil than this one did out of this pistol. So this feels a little bit more controllable for recoil in my opinion. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these two compare. All right, first up we have our 9mm. We're going to do our plain clear ballistics shot. No fabric in the way that can potentially clog a hollow point, and a rib simulation that could potentially slow down the penetration. So let's see if we get here with our 9mm and our plain clear ballistics shot. All right. Now let's hit that with our 45 ACP. Both of those were out. They're not malfunctioning. So let's go take a look. All right, so a bit more penetration with our 45 and a bit more straight line penetration. Now our 9mm did arc down, and once it got to this point, it went underneath this gel block just a little bit, because these do bow up a little bit on the bottom there. But considering it happened right at the end here, I don't think that would have went any further even if that wouldn't have happened. So I'm going to count that as totally acceptable, and really good expansion with both of these. Now our 45 has some bullet jump back, rollback. Generally, when I see that the bullet has expanded to over 65/100ths of an inch, that's just a consistent thing that I've seen. So likely that 45 expanded to that big, at least at some point. Energy dump in this first 3 inches here, both really good, but our 45 is a little bit more like it's just, you know, scaled up a little bit. So that's good to see that. So really good overall. Now our 9mm, our total path went right to, I'm going to call it right at 18 inches. So perfect amount of penetration, a nice amount of tearing here. Now generally you can't judge the quote unquote damage in clear ballistics, but when you see striations here, and that's what I'm seeing, that means those were caused by actual petals cutting it versus like tumbling and causing the, you know, a big bubble in that gel. So what I can say is that through this entire gel block, those were expanded and cutting. That's really, really good. Now our 45 ACP, our total penetration went to 19 inches, a little bit deep, and then it rolled back, but much straighter line, which means you got more momentum going on with that 45, and that's really where that word belongs. A lot of people think momentum. When I say momentum, it's like the movie Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis and everybody goes flying because of 45. That's not what I'm saying. Momentum is good for keeping a bullet in line going through your target straight, and we have more of that with the 45. So both these look really good so far. So let's put on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, and see how these compare in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material, followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent hitting back ribs. And I'm going to try to keep these bullets without going through the back rib simulation. You got to remember, this is a half representation of the density, so whatever you see in there is half that distance and an actual living target. So 9mm through our real world simulation. Let's see how this does. All right. And let's hit that with our 45 ACP plus P. Let's go take a look. All right, so our 9mm actually did not expand. It got some good damage, but likely that's from tumbling, because that's a kind of a long bullet. And both of them looks like it hit the rib simulation with both of them. So let's take a look at this back rib simulation. I kept them in there, so that's good. Our 9mm just kind of nicked it there. And our 45 also did that, and they both came through just a little bit. They cracked the back just a little bit. So both of those went to the exact same penetration. So our 9mm is at 19 inches of penetration, and our 45 ACP is also at 19 inches of penetration. But the difference here is that our 45 still expanded really good. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, that's not fair. That's 45s plus P. And I think the reason why I did that is because with the 9mm, you're looking for a good carry gun load that's not going to have a ton of recoil. And it's already moving fast. So you don't gain a whole lot by making it a plus P and making it go faster. As well with the 45, if you didn't make it a plus P, it would probably be moving much too slow to get expansion. So they had to make it a plus P to give it the velocity to, you know, be more comparable to a higher velocity round, so we can actually get expansion there. But interesting though, the paths look very similar. In the first 3 inches has more energy dump with the 45 than the 9mm, and that makes sense because it looks like the fabric is what caused the lack of expansion with the 9mm, because that energy dump has shrunk down quite a bit. As worth the 45 still has a lot there. And let's take a look at here this rib simulation I forgot to pull out. And yeah, we could see right away our 9mm, nope. Our 45, massive amount of expansion going on there. So hands down, the 45 did quite a bit better than this load. And I'm not here trying to like beat on the 9mm and be like, it's terrible. In these loads, I would say the 9mm you could do better. But this is a good 45 load for a subcompact 45 pistol. So very nice. Let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at these bullets, and then I'm going to shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 9mm and our 45 ACP. So both of those had really good expansion overall. Pretty close in size, but you know, there's definitely just a more consistent expansion going on with that 45 versus that 9mm. So pretty good performance overall in our plain gel shot. Now going through our rib simulation and our fabric, that changes up quite a bit because the 9mm failed, but our 45 almost looks the same with or without that fabric there. And you know, the petals peeled back a little bit more with our real world simulation than through our plain gel, but they both look really good. So here's our 9mm. Here's our 45 ACP going through our fabric and our rib simulation. So big difference there. Plain gel versus real world simulation 9mm, and real world simulation versus plain gel with our 45 ACP. So 45 was just a bit more consistent. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target. So I just want to see what kind of practical shootability I can get with these, see if it's like very difficult to control that 45 versus this 9mm, because that does matter quite a bit. You know, if there's a round that has way too much recoil, you know, it's not going to be that practical. But let's say I get here with our 9mm from 14 yards. Just going to get a front sight picture and pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. I'm not going for groups. I'm going more for just like getting a front sight picture as if it were like a self-defense situation. So 9mm. I'm going to be honest here. I noticed when I was chronographing it and now, that 9mm actually has a lot more recoil than what you would think it should have. It's a little bit higher than normal. I don't know why. It's just a little bit higher than normal. 45 ACP. Let's see how this does. And again, I would say less recoil than that original version for some reason. You know, there's a little bit less velocity, but not by much. This is definitely more comfortable to shoot than that original 200 grain. So maybe they use a little bit different powder because they're anticipating that it happens, you know, you're going to be using it in a short barrel, so they use the faster burning powder, and it just so happens that it does the same velocity in a 5-inch barrel for the rating. Probably not, but there's a possibility. So let me back it up a little bit and see how these shoot from just a little more distance. All right, 40 yards from the target, our dick and drill distance. I'm not going to do the actual dick and drill, but you know, I think it is practical to see how your handguns will do at a little more distance, because 40 yards in the woods, 40 yards on range here, seems like far, but there's been incidences where, you know, 40 yards was a shot that might have been needed, and you know, 40 yards across the parking lot or 40 yards in a mall where somebody might be trying to hurt people and you're there and maybe you could stop that threat. That's actually not very far, to be honest. So let's see what I can do with our 9mm. I'm just gonna fire slow, see if I can hit the target with our 9mm. So I don't know why I missed a couple. I was aiming in the same spot every time. It's kind of odd. So 45 ACP, I do put these pistols in my pocket the same way every time, so I know the muzzle direction and there's nothing else in my pockets. 45, see what this does. So that 45 just seemed really consistent overall. So it's really weird, like that recoil of that 9mm is just quite high for what you're getting out of it. As for the 45, the recoil is pretty low for what you're getting out of it. I don't understand that at all. It could have something to do with the pistols themselves, but I just had a really good feeling about this 45, and the 9mm just didn't seem all that good overall, to be honest here. So obvious winner here for terminal ballistics, that our 45 did a lot better than this 9mm, and I would definitely carry that. So I know that at this point this always gets into the debate of capacity here, and a lot of people want to have a lot of capacity, and they will say they're never going to use a 45 because of that. And I can understand that to a degree, because I guess there are outlier situations where you might need a lot of rounds, but most of that is within law enforcement. You're talking a regular concealed carrier, you just don't hear of reloads. You don't hear of needing more than a certain number of rounds. You know, Paul Harrell used to say, you know, it's highly unlikely that you'd ever need more than 5 shots. And that's completely, you know, that's completely data there. I've been studying this stuff for a long time. The average shots are between 1 and 5 in a self-defense scenario, with the average being 3. So the way I look at it is, if I had like a 9mm or maybe even 38 where the ballistics weren't all that good, and I could have something that's a lot better ballistics, like a 45 or a 357 Magnum. Yeah, it comes with less capacity, it comes with way more recoil, but when you look at the data, basically, the more powerful you go, the faster you go, you know, the more bullet weight, all of that, you're on a little bit closer to the lower end of that average, as we're less powerful, you're a little bit closer to the higher end of that average. The incapacitation times are slightly different. This is from multiple sources, not just the old Snow and Marshall list that people think is garbage. It's also from the Greg Elfritz studies and all of that. Once you go up to 45, these averages start to change a little bit by small amounts. And while those might be small amounts, to me, they make a big difference, because if you have just that little bit of advantage, that within that 5-shot, you know, average to stop a threat, or 3-shot average, I should say, with 5 being, you know, the higher end of that average there, if there can be a second shaved off, or 2 seconds shaved off, because 1 or 2 hits significantly did better than 1 or 2 or 3 hits of a lower power cartridge, to me, that makes a lot more sense. That makes a lot more sense. But I'll stop here, because I could go on all day about this. This is my opinion. I would rather have, you know, better terminal ballistics with less capacity than bad terminal ballistics with a lot of capacity. That's just me. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. And thanks for watching.